Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Today I'm going to be talking about my research study, books, bills, and balance, predicting mood from study, work, and self care hours in university students. This study looks at how the amount of time students spend on studying, working, and doing self care might affect their mood. The aim was to understand more about emotional well-being of students who also have paid jobs during the academic term. A little about myself. My name is Priyanka. I'm an MSc counseling student at Bangor University. To begin with, let's think about why this study matters. Many students today work while studying. Studies have shown that students who work more than 15 to 20 hours a week are more likely to feel tired, stressed, and emotionally overwhelmed. Even though this is common, much of the advice given to students about self care doesn't consider how little time or energy they may have. Most suggestions assume that all students have the same resources and time. On top of that, a lot of research treats students as one group, but students who have different pressures, academic, financial, and emotional, they may experience it differently. Like research explains, these students are often not included in studies about student well-being. That's exactly why I chose to focus this research on students who have term time jobs to better understand their experiences and how these might affect their emotional health. What we already know. Now let's go over what previous studies have shown. First, mood is a big part of student life. It can affect motivation and how well someone does in their studies. Positive moods helps Positive moods help students stay engaged, while negative moods are linked to stress and difficulty focusing. Second, high workloads, both from studying and from working, are linked to stress and feeling drained, especially when students are trying to manage both. Third, even though self care is encouraged, it doesn't always help unless it's done on purpose and in a way that actually helps the person feel better. Research points out that it's not just the activity that matters, but whether it meets important emotional needs like feeling in control or connected to others. So, even though each of these areas has been studied, they haven't really looked at together, especially in students who work. This is what makes the current study important. It attempts to bring these strands together. So, what's missing? Let's look at the gap in the literature. Most research looks at studying, working, or self care by themselves. Very few studies explore how these things work together. Even fewer focus only on students who are working during term time. But working students have their own set of challenges. They often have more responsibilities, less free time, and more stress. And I think all of this can affect how they study and how they take care of themselves. This study was designed to look at how time spent on studying, working, and self care connects to mood for students who don't usually get much attention in research. Next, I'm just going to explain the three predictions we made before we started the study. First, we thought that more time spent on self care would be linked to better mood, meaning more positive emotions and fewer negative ones. Second, we expected that more hours of studying would be linked to worse mood, possibly due to stress and having less time for other things. Third, we predicted that more work hours would lead to worse mood because of the pressure and time demands of having a job while studying. These were informed by past research, but also by what we hear from students in everyday academic and counseling contexts. Now, let's move on to how we carried out the study. We used an online survey and recruited around 40 university students who had term time jobs. Recruitment happened through the university research system and social media, which helped us read students from a variety of courses. To measure mood, we use the PANA scale. It includes two sets of mood states, one for positive feelings, such as being excited, and another for negative feelings, like being distressed or upset. Students also told us how many hours they spent each week on studying, working, and doing self care. It's important to note that we didn't define self care for the students. Each person could say what counted as self care for them. This made the responses more natural and authentic, but also meant that different students might have had different ideas about what self care meant. For example, one student might list self care as exercising, while another might list watching TV. Both are valid, but they might have different emotional impacts. Now, let's look at what we found. So, the results suggested none of the predictions were supported by strong evidence. More hours of self care didn't clearly lead to better mood. There was no consistent pattern showing that students who spent more time on self care felt significantly more positive or less negative. Studying more hours showed a slight trend toward worse mood, but the relationship was weak and not significant. Work hours also didn't show a clear connection to mood. Whether students worked few or many hours, their mood levels didn't show consistent change. So, in short, the amount of time students spent studying, working, or doing self care did not strongly predict how they felt, either positively or negatively. Um, so, again, what do these results mean? Let's discuss that. One idea is that it might not be the number of hours that matter, but how students feel about the time they spend. In other words, the emotional quality of an activity could matter more than the quantity. For example, let's say two students might both report 3 hours of self care, but one student might spend that time feeling calm and relaxed, while the other might feel bored or even more stressed, such as by staying inside, doom scrolling, watching Netflix. Um, so even though the time is the same, the emotional effect might be different. This idea also applies to study and work. A student who enjoys their job might feel more motivated and positive, whereas another who finds their job draining may feel more tired and negative. So perhaps mood is not just about hours, it's about how meaningful, manageable, or enjoyable those hours feel. It's not mentioned here, but it also fits with self-determination theory, which suggests that well-being improves when people feel in control of what they do, when they feel like they have achieved something, that they feel that they're competent, and when they feel connected to others. These findings suggest that universities and student support services might want to focus not just on how much time students are spending on things, but also how they feel during those times. Now, moving on, limitations, implications, and future research. Now, let's look at some of the studies' limitations and what we can learn from them. First, the small number of participants, only 40, limits how much we can apply these findings to the wider student population. It's possible that with more participants, we might have seen clearer patterns. Second, letting students define self-care in their own way made the study more flexible, but it also meant we were comparing very different activities. For one person, self-care could mean going on a walk. For another, it could mean watching a movie. These differences make it harder to measure the effect of self-care as one category. Even with those limitations, there are clear takeaways. Rather than telling students to simply do more self-care or to manage their time better, we need to understand whether their routines are actually helping them feel supported, balanced, or calm. I think future studies should include more students from different backgrounds and universities. Ask students to describe how they feel about each activity, not just how long they spend doing it. Follow, kind of like follow students over several weeks or months to see how mood and time use change together. This kind of research could help create better and more practical advice for students who are balancing multiple responsibilities. Now, here's a list of references that I used in the presentation. To finish up, this study looked at whether time spent on study, work, and self-care could predict mood in students who work during term time. We didn't really find strong links between time spent and mood, but that doesn't mean these activities don't matter. It just means we need to dig deeper into the emotional meaning behind them. How students feel while studying, working, or doing self-care may have more of an impact than how many hours they spend on each. So what can universities and support teams could take from this? Instead of giving everyone the same advice, we should look at what helps individual students feel emotionally well and supported. That's what really matters when trying to improve student well-being. I also want to share something. As a student who used to work while studying at some point, I found it incredibly difficult to manage my time. Forget about self-care and going home, doing something for myself. That was the last thing, and that was the least of my priorities. There were times I struggled to even complete my assignments. I was fortunate enough to eventually be in a position where I could stop working to focus on my studies, but many students, such as my friends, colleagues, course mates, people that I know of who are like older, especially those in postgraduate courses, the mature students have much more responsibilities and the pressure can be intense. That's why this research felt so important to me. That's about it. Thank you so much for listening. Please feel free to ask any questions in the comments, and I will do my best to answer them as soon as possible. Thank you so much for your time. Bye.